The frost in Kitchener, Ontario, doesn't just settle, it claims. It's a silent, silver suffocator that turns gardens into graveyards overnight. That Saturday morning, as I stood at my kitchen window watching the ice crystallize on my wife's dormant hydrangeas, I realized I had spent 30 years teaching history and running high schools, only to become a footnote in my own son's secret empire. I have spent 3 decades helping other people's children find their way. I have sat across from varsity quarterbacks and honors students who lied to my face with a sociopathic confidence that, quite frankly, impressed me. I always thought I had their principal's eye, that sixth sense for a flickering eyelid or a shaky voice. But the one teenager I never saw coming was sleeping 30 feet down the hall from me, dreaming in digital currency. Welcome back to Revenge Justice. Before we get into the mechanical hum that shattered my household, drop a comment with your city. I want to know who's watching the scales of justice balance today. And if you haven't subscribed, do it now. You're going to want to see how I turned my son's secret, a startup, into his own personal prison. My name is Raymond Calvert. I'm 55. For 11 years, I've been the principal of Westmount Secondary. I run my school with a zero variance policy. My wife, Margaret, says I run our home like a federal courtroom. She means it as a warning. I take it as a badge of honor. Structure produces outcomes. Chaos produces failure. And my son, Callum, had just invited chaos into my basement. Callum is 19. Bright, charismatic, and possessed of that dangerously hustle culture, a mentality that values profit over protocol. He was living under my roof rent-free, his car insurance paid, his fridge stocked, all on the condition that he upgrade his grades for university. For 4 months, he locked his door every weekend. He told us he was deep diving into his studies. He even carried a leather-bound binder to breakfast to sell the lie. I respected the closed door. In my line of work, you learn that teenagers need a perimeter. But then came the night of the board gala. I came home late, the house whispering with the cold, and as I passed his door, I heard it. A rhythmic, mechanical drone. Not a fan. Not a heater. It was the sound of something consuming. The next morning, while Callum was in the shower, I exercised my right as the superintendent of this house. I walked in. I found his study materials. Under his desk, shielded by an acoustic blanket and a mess of high-end cooling fans, was a professional-grade cryptocurrency mining rig. 2 top-tier graphics cards, a dedicated router, and a ledger that showed he had cleared nearly $9,000 in 3 months. He wasn't studying for his future. He was stealing my electricity to build his own, bypassing my authority and my wallet to fund a life I was already subsidizing. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the desk. I did what any good administrator does. I gathered evidence. I photographed every wire, every serial number, and every entry in that ledger. Then, I dismantled the rig. I moved it to my study, a room with a steel core door and a deadbolt he didn't have the key for. I called my friend Gerald, a guidance counselor who has seen the darkest corners of the teenage mind. I told him the dollar amount. Raymond, he said, the kid is a genius. But he's a genius who just committed commercial theft against his own father. Then I called Diane. She's not just a lawyer, she's a shark who specializes in binding domestic agreements. I told her I didn't want him arrested, I wanted him managed. If he wants to play at being a CEO, Diane said, her voice like a sliding blade, then we treat him like a subsidiary. I'll have the parental oversight and asset recovery contract ready by Monday morning. The tension in the house over the next 48 hours was thick enough to choke on. Callum was blissfully unaware, still playing the role of the diligent student. I watched him at dinner, casually asking about his studies, and he had the audacity to tell me he was struggling with the complexity of 19th century trade routes. I almost laughed. The only trade routes he cared about were the ones moving Bitcoin through my fiber optic cables. I sat there, cutting my steak with surgical precision, knowing that the trade route he had built was about to hit a brick wall. Monday morning, 9 a.m., the kitchen table was set, but not for breakfast. I had the contract in a manila folder. I had a single photo of his dismantled rig face down on the granite. Margaret sat in the living room, a silent witness. She had gone through the stages of grief in 10 seconds flat when I told her, landing squarely on a surgical anger. Callum walked in, smelling like expensive cologne, probably bought with my diverted electricity. He saw the folder. He saw my face, the principal's face. He started to explain, but I told him to sit down. My voice was low. A man who screams has already lost the room. I told him I wasn't his data right then. I was the landlord he'd been defrauding for 114 days. I slid the photo across the table and watched the blood drain from his face. It was the same look I see on kids' court with a master key to the gym. I told him he ran a commercial enterprise on a residential grid without a permit, without disclosure, and on my dime. In the professional world, that's called embezzlement and breach of contract. I slid the contract over. This was the revenge. He had two choices. Choice A, I call the police. We report the unauthorized electrical bypass and the undeclared income. He could explain his entrepreneurial spirit to a judge in a suit that isn't as nice as the one he was wearing. Choice B, he signs the indemnification and sublease agreement. The look of defeated frustration in his eyes was more satisfying than the $9,000. The real revenge wasn't the money. It was the total loss of autonomy. Now, every Sunday night, Callum has to submit a revenue and expenditure report to me in my office. He has to sit in his student chair while I sit behind my desk. He has to explain his trades, his wallet balances, and his academic progress. He has to justify every penny. If his grades slip, even by a percentage point, I pull the plug on the router. Literally. I have a remote switch installed on his circuit now. I can kill his connection from my smartphone while I'm at school. If you've made it this far, do me a favor and subscribe. Justice in the real world isn't about explosions. It's about a perfectly balanced ledger and a man who knows how to hold the pen. People ask me if I'm being too hard on him. I tell them that I'm a master of history. And history teaches us one thing: the person who controls the power grid controls the world. I am teaching him the most valuable lesson a young man can learn. The world doesn't care about your hustle or if your foundation is built on theft. Callum is doing well now. He's top of his class at Laurier. He's precise. He's disciplined. He's learned that real power isn't in the coins you mine, but in the contracts you honor. But every time he hears a mechanical hum in the house, he freezes. He remembers that Saturday morning. He remembers that his father isn't just a man who runs school board meetings, he's the man who owns the circuit. I still remember that morning by the window. I still remember the rehumidifier Eli. But now, when I look at that trust account, the one that will pay for his master's degree using the very money he tried to hide from me, I realize that the best revenge isn't just winning. It's making sure the person who crossed you grows up to be the person who thanks you for the lesson. My name is Raymond Calvert. This is Revenge Justice. The lights are on, the contracts are signed, and I am officially back in control of my own house. Are yours? Because if you think you can short-circuit the rules in my building, you'd better be prepared for the blackout. I'm always watching the meter, and I know exactly when the load doesn't match the output. Stay grounded, or prepare to be disconnected.